ये चीज़ जनरली स्पीकिंग वेस्ट से आ रही है, एंड वेस्ट में भी एंग्लो सैक्सन वेस्ट से आ रही है, यानी इंग्लिश स्पीकिंग वर्ल्ड से ज़्यादा आ रहा है.
But that's just historically inaccurate. And where is this guy coming up with this stuff from? I mean, he's engaging with Anglophone stuff. It's Anglophone, not Anglo-Saxon. But he's engaging with it doesn't mean that it only exists in that way. I mean, Berlin, which is not Anglophone, had a pretty thriving LGBT scene in the 1920s. It was actually the Nazis that suppressed it. But in any case, being gay or being trans cannot come from any one part of the world. The evidence does not indicate that, and how would that even happen? If somebody is naturally gay or trans, like you can see that someone's a little kid and they have a certain gender identity, or they have a certain sexual orientation, or someone's a teenager and they have a certain gender identity or sexual orientation, how can their gender identity be impacted by some other part of the world? Not only is there zero evidence that actually happens, it's contrary even to common sense. And if that's the case, if it's simply like watching, say, an American TV show or something, will somehow, by some process nobody understands, actually change your internal gender identity or your sexual orientation, suppose that were to happen, then wouldn't everybody who's consuming this media end up with those sexual orientations and gender identities, including people in Western societies? But in Western societies, most people are not LGBT. Most people are cis-het. LGBT people are a minority. For example, the UK census in 2021 put gay and lesbian people at 1.5% of the population, and trans people at less than 1%. Now, if by ye cheese what he means is not actually being LGBT, but is the movement itself, that is the LGBT rights movement and the cultural phenomena around it, well, it's true that the LGBT rights movement does emerge historically first in Western societies. This is also true of the feminist movement and various other social justice movements, not specifically the Anglophone. As a matter of fact, I think that Berlin was actually more advanced even than the Anglosphere when it came to LGBT rights at a certain point prior to the rise of the Nazis. Nevertheless, other parts of the world have also caught up, and they have their own reasons for supporting LGBT rights that have nothing to do with the West. And for example, Thailand has legalized gay marriage, and Thailand has actually been more advanced in trans rights than even Western societies at a certain point. Thailand is part of the East. Everywhere in the world, there is some sort of LGBT rights movement. It's just that in more extremely homophobic societies, which tend to be Muslim majority societies in this day and age, because of Muslim jahalat in this day and age. Muslims have not always been jahil. As a matter of fact, Islamic civilizations were some of the most advanced civilizations in the world at some point in history. But they became more jahil after a certain point, and this is certainly a manifestation of that jahalat. It's a racist and right-wing assumption. It's actually sometimes people on the left make this assumption too, but mostly I've encountered this by people on the right, that we don't have our own reasons, but like white Western people or just Western people in general are doing something, so we're automatically going to do that thing. Besides the fact that there is zero empirical data backing that up, there is actually evidence against it. I mean, first of all, people in Western societies don't all do the same thing. So if we're imitating people in Western societies, then who are we imitating? Secondly, we are giving our own reasons. We have explicitly stated what our reasons are. You're just not engaging with it because you know you can't defeat our arguments on the merits. So we have explicitly stated, we meaning progressive people, those who support LGBT rights, we have explicitly stated that these are the reasons we support it. Because persecution is wrong. Because people have basic human rights. Because persecuting gay people is not going to change their sexual orientation. And because being gay or bi or trans is clearly something that's an aspect of human nature, as is being cis-het. That's not the case with, say, being a murderer or whatever, which is not an identity, but is something that is just defined by violence against others. Because we don't intuitively feel that there's anything wrong with someone being gay or bisexual or being in a same-sex relationship, in the way that we intuitively do feel that there's something wrong with, say, incest. So we've actually made substantive arguments. You people haven't made any arguments, certainly no good ones, but you're just assuming that we don't have any reasons, that we have no logic, no thinking about this issue, that we just watch what Western people do, arbitrarily select a segment of the Western population, and then follow whatever it is that they're doing. Not only is this narrative ridiculous, but you are using this narrative as a way to try to dismiss our perspective and not have to actually address the correct points that we have.
Like for example, अगर आप ईस्टर्न यूरोप को स्टडी करेंगे या आप रशिया को अगर स्टडी करेंगे तो वो बहुत ज़्यादा खिलाफ हैं homosexuality के.
This dummy thinks Russia is part of the West. It's not.
यानी अगर आप फितरत से पूछेंगे कि क्या ये चीज़ होनी चाहिए, तो obviously आपके अंदर से आवाज़ आएगी नहीं, it's gross. और यही वजह है कि अभी तक, जैसे अहमद भाई ने कहा, ईस्टर्न यूरोप में वो कंट्रीज जिन्होंने थोड़ा बहुत चर्च के ट्रेडिशन को या रिलीजन के ट्रेडिशन को अभी तक जो है कायम रखा हुआ है, उनके अंदर नेचुरल एक कराहत जो है वो मौजूद है.
Now, this is the closest thing to an actual argument that anyone has given from the right-wing Muslim side against homosexuality. What he's saying is that people have some kind of intuition against homosexuality, that there is a natural disgust that people experience. Now, the reason this is the closest thing to an argument, meaning the closest thing to a good argument, is that intuition is a source of evidence. The problem is that he has not justified the claim that this is a genuine intuition and not just a prejudice. The mere fact that some people experience disgust is not evidence that it's an intuition. I mean, people experience disgust about all sorts of things. Racist people experience disgust at the thought of interracial marriage, and so on with various other kinds of prejudices and bigoted sentiment. Now, there are certain criteria we can apply to distinguish between intuition and prejudice. None of these is absolute, but these are signs that something is an intuition rather than a prejudice, and that is, one, the universality of it, that everybody instinctively, or at least a vast majority of people, will automatically take a certain position or have a certain reaction. An example of this is incest aversion. Human beings instinctively feel disgust at the thought of incest, especially incest between parents and children. And we see that culturally this is universal. Incestuous marriage is not legalized anywhere. The closest thing is the legalization of cousin marriages and the social practice of cousin marriages, which is actually more common in Pakistan than it is in any Western society. So incest aversion is highly universal, but homophobia is not that universal. And that's in the case of synchronic universality. When we consider diachronic, that is the persistence of an intuition historically, we also see that you don't have that in the case of homophobia, that is negative attitudes toward homosexuality, but you do have that in the case of incest aversion. People are just as, if not more, incest averse now than they were before. But people are less homophobic now than they were before. Since history generally moves forward, we see that social justice advances over time, whether it's for women, racial minorities, etc. It's highly likely that if people are becoming less homophobic over time, the homophobia that they had was a prejudice to begin with. There are also other signs that homophobia is a prejudice and not an intuition. And that includes that when you get to know gay people, people who may have been homophobic before, when they make friends with someone who is gay, for example, will tend to become less homophobic as a consequence. That's something you see with prejudices, like someone's racist against a group of people, but then when they become friends with a member of that group, they become less racist. But you don't see that with incest aversion. You don't see that somebody meets a person who experiences incestuous attraction and then they start becoming more sympathetic to incest. Now, the mere fact that every society has gay people within it, that there's a small percentage of the population, less than 10% as far as I know, exact figures vary, but a small percentage of the population that is same-sex or same-gender attracted, there is no small percentage of the population in every society that is naturally oriented toward members of their own natal family. That itself shows that there is clearly a difference between homosexuality and incest, with homosexuality being something that's just natural to human beings as well as various other animals, but incest not being. Rather, incest aversion is natural to human beings. But the reaction of even heterosexuals to homosexuality further drives this point home. Not only the reaction to the content, like the TV and the movies, for example, but also the reaction to the thought of engaging in homosexual activity. There are heterosexuals who engage in same-sex sexual activity, either out of curiosity or out of sexual frustration or something, and sometimes they do it because they're participating in gay-for-pay pornography. But there's no equivalent of that when it comes to incest. And there's no genre of media that's focused on incest in the way that there is that's focused on homosexuality. And this genre of media doesn't only exist in Western societies, it also exists in the East. For example, in East Asia, there is a genre of entertainment media called boy love, and also girl love, but boy love is more popular. Boy love is gay male themed animations and comics and so on, whose audience is mainly straight women. Even in the case of pornography, straight people watch and even get turned on by gay pornography, whether it's gay male pornography or lesbian pornography. But people aren't going around even seeking out, let alone actually watching or getting aroused by incest pornography, where you have actual incest taking place. And a question for homophobic people is, if you were given a choice between engaging in a sexual act with a member of the same sex, I'm talking to straight homophobic people right now. If you are a cishet man, for example, who thinks that homosexuality is wrong, especially if you compare it to incest, and you are in a forced choice situation between, say, sexually kissing or engaging in some sexual act with another man, let's suppose he's good looking, and let's suppose that there's no penetration, because that kind of complicates things, versus engaging in the same act or the most similar act that you can with a member of the opposite sex who is part of your natal family, like your mother, for example, or your sister. Which one would you choose? I guarantee that either everybody, or at least the vast majority, would choose participating in the non-incestuous homosexual act.
ये ज़्यादा नॉर्मलाइज करना चाह रहे हैं हर किसी की लाइफ में ये लोग, एक तरह से ब्रेन वॉश ही कह लेते हैं.
This claim about brainwashing is also a popular trope in the Muslim/Pakistani right wing. ये brainwash कर रहे हैं, Western media तो हमें बताता है कि ये चीज़ normal है और हमें करना चाहिए. Nobody's saying that. Nobody's brainwashed, and you have no evidence that this is brainwashing. Again, we have our reasons. We have actually defended our position with arguments. So our reasoning includes things like people have fundamental human rights and gay people are humans, and various other arguments that I'm not going to go and present all again. How do we know that you're not the ones doing the brainwashing? How do we know that it's not the mullah group, the burger Taliban group, or the general Taliban/Islamist group that is doing the brainwashing? After all, you guys have no arguments to defend your position. The definition of brainwashing is not whenever somebody defends a position you don't like or a position that you perceive as un-Islamic. Neither is brainwashing any attempt to influence people's opinions in any way at all. Because you can influence people's opinions in a legitimate way that involves presenting reasons that can rationally influence somebody's opinion. If we apply the public reason test that I stated in part 1 of my Debunking Kaisar Raja series, then we should ask the question of whether you would agree to policies discriminating against gay people if you did not know what your sexual orientation was going to be. And can it be reasonably rejected that God wants straight people to discriminate against gay people because once upon a time he maybe destroyed people in cities of Sodom and Gomorrah? The answer to the first question is no. There's no way you can rationally support policies that discriminate against yourself. And the answer to the second question is yes, you certainly can reasonably reject it, because there isn't any decisive evidence to prove that the Sodom and Gomorrah incident actually happened in the way that is described in the Bible and the Quran.